Before the highly unusual presidential election merges in our minds with the highly unusual events that have happened since the election, I want to discuss the role of gender in contributing to the outcome. So conventional wisdom has focused on racial and class resentment as influencing the election. And what I want to examine today is internalized misogyny as another important factor. So obviously, people assumed that women would vote for Clinton in large numbers, and women of color did so at around 80%. What pollsters failed to predict was the voting behavior of white women, 53% of whom voted for Trump. So considering educational background, 61% of white women without a college degree and 44% of those with a degree voted for Trump. I've written a book chapter examining gender and feminist consciousness and internalized misogyny. And in it, I've attempted to answer a question that was eloquently described by our history colleague, Georgina Hickey, when she asked, why did white women vote for a sexist asshole? I examine the ways in which the Clinton campaign failed to fully mobilize the gender and feminist consciousness of women voters. Gender consciousness is an awareness of women's political and social interests and makes salient the status of women as women. Gender consciousness is distinct from feminist consciousness, which is an awareness and critique of gender inequalities and patriarchy. Nearly all women, whether feminist or not, have internalized the misogyny of our culture. Because subtle gender inequalities are pervasive, even people who identify as feminists may find themselves unconsciously preferring male leadership. In the election, the notion of a woman being elected as president seemed to repel many women, especially white women. And internalized misogyny and the inability of the Clinton campaign to overcome it by fully activating and mobilizing gender and feminist consciousness ultimately contributed to Trump's victory. So while the public is generally supportive of a woman running for president, not everyone supports this notion. For example, a Pew Research Center study revealed that only 3/4 of both men and women agree that men and women make equally good political leaders. Even a small percentage withholding approval and voting accordingly could tip the balance in a close election. Women candidates face a no-win situation. Many voters view them negatively if they are portrayed by the media as violating gender stereotypes, or if they are portrayed as too nurturing and sensitive. The former is the case for Clinton, who has been criticized for having qualities that are not viewed negatively when perceived in male politicians, including being ambitious and strong. Although many people have entrenched negative opinions about Clinton, who've been in the public eye for many years, there was widespread blatant misogyny during the election. For example, Trump interrupted Clinton over 50 times in the first debate and 37 times in the third debate versus her interrupting him 11 and 9 times respectively. At Trump rallies, it was common to see misogynistic campaign materials, such as t-shirts with the slogan, "Trump that bitch," or pins with the slogan, "Finally someone with balls." Yet many women also embraced these messages. For example, a female Trump supporter was seen wearing a t-shirt with the words, "Trump can grab my," and an arrow pointing down. And it really makes sense for some women, and in particular we're talking about white women primarily, to support Trump if you think about the ways in which their husbands and other male family members are voting for him. So journalist Rebecca Solnit states that believing in equality can make your life unpleasant and dangerous if you live in a marriage, a family, a community, a church, a state that does not agree with you about this. Journalist Nina Burley remarked that the Trump factor not only frightened women, it quieted them. That many women simply kept things smooth by not speaking up. Psychologist Jen Kim points out that internalized misogyny may be present for women who are dependent on men because inequality is easier than challenging patriarchal arrangements. This may especially be the case for working-class white women with lower levels of education, as they have fewer resources and may be more financially dependent on men. So in contrast to all of that, however, I want to talk about a number of flashpoints. I want to talk about one flashpoint in particular, but there were a number of flashpoints during the election when gender and/or feminist consciousness became salient for many women voters. And the most notable of these was the release of the now infamous 2005 conversation with Billy Bush of Access Hollywood, in which Trump bragged about kissing and groping women without their consent. So the subsequent media explosion that happened as 8 million women responded to Kelly Oxford's call to tweet me your first assaults illustrated the activation of feminist consciousness and gender consciousness as well, as women became aware of their interests as women in contrast to Trump's candidacy. So the question in my mind was, how did the Clinton campaign respond to gender-relevant issues in her campaign? And many of her materials certainly did emphasize gender, but as a woman candidate, she had a very hard and very fine line to walk over emphasizing gender and how that was going to be perceived. So my analysis of the airing of TV ads suggests that the Access Hollywood moment was really a missed opportunity to further activate and mobilize gender and feminist consciousness. Although the campaign released at least 2 advertisements, and this is one of them, that sought to highlight Trump's misogyny, they were not aired as frequently as other ads, and they were hardly aired at all after the Access Hollywood tape release. The advertisement called Mirrors shows girls looking at themselves in a mirror while a voiceover with Trump's voice replays his negative statements about women, including words like slob and pig. And another ad highlights Trump's disparaging and insulting comments towards women and ends with an admission that he can't say whether or not he treats women with respect. My analysis reveals that these 2 ads aired less than 100 times after the Access Hollywood tape was released, while other ads, such as Trump can't be trusted with nuclear weapons, were shown significantly more frequently, so 2,000 times, in fact. There were many reasons why the Clinton campaign may not have wanted to highlight gender, and I obviously don't have time to discuss them now, but it needs to be considered a missed opportunity. Women from all types of backgrounds unconsciously internalized misogyny, and the Trump campaign was able to tap into these perspectives unexpectedly among white women in particular. At the same time, we really have to ask whether Clinton could have done more to effectively tap and mobilize the gender and feminist consciousness of women voters. And although certainly race and class play an important role in explaining the election's outcome and are integrally intertwined with gender in many respects, we need to also remember that gender was a decisive factor in the election.